Hey, Joe Zarzaur here with part 3 of our motor vehicle accident neck and back pain with Dr. Malone. In part 1, just as a review, we covered what happens after a wreck when you go to the ER and you get that cervical strain, back strain, whiplash diagnosis. Do you need a lawyer? Most of the time you do. Then we moved into part 2, which is where your treatment phase, basically, where they're trying to figure out where your pain's coming from, how bad it is, and they usually put you in an MRI machine during that stage of your treatment, which is usually within 6 to 8 months after the wreck. And then in this particular hypothetical case we're covering, where the lady went to the ER, she had a neck strain diagnosis in the ER, she continued to have symptoms, she went to a pain management doctor, they put her through the conservative treatment, she did the injections at trigger point, epidurals, radiofrequency ablation. Unfortunately, those were not helpful to her. And then when we left off in part 2, we were talking about this particular hypothetical patient, who is a real client here, who was eventually referred out, and a very typical client, to be honest with you, who was referred out to a neurosurgeon because they couldn't get pain relief for her neck pain that we now know is from the disc herniation at C6-7 because we now have the MRI.
Yes, and that was a year.
Right, a year, pretty much, before she's now at this spot at the neurosurgeon's office getting a consultation. So doctor, walk us through, in this hypothetical situation, although it's a real client and patient, what happened with this particular lady.
Okay, so this client was at the neurosurgeon for 2 visits. One for the initial, let's look at the films ourselves that you had done during your treatment phase. Let's walk through real quick and see everything that's been done. Let's examine you to see if your symptoms line up with the level of the disc that's herniated. And then the next visit is a pre-op visit, really saying, hey, we can offer surgery.
You make a good point. He makes a good point. And I need to interject something right here.
Yeah.
All along the process, you know how we showed you where the disc was herniated in the prior video? It was C6-7 down here on the spinal cord, okay? In the cervical region, which is the neck region of the spinal cord, or the vertebrae. All along, every doctor is trying to see whether or not the pain that they're complaining about, or the numbness, or the range of motion issues, or the shooting pain, is that consistent with the level of disc herniation, right? Mm-hmm. Every doctor is gauging that.
Yeah.
And no patient really understands how the distribution works with the nerve pain, right?
Yeah.
So all along, before you get to the neurosurgeon's office, every doctor all along is looking to see, okay, wait a minute. She has a disc herniation in C6-7, but she says her big toe hurts.
Yeah.
That would not line up with a C6-7.
Exactly.
Right? But if you have a C6-7 disc injury and you have pain in your arm or in your back of your shoulder or someplace, that does line up, right?
Yeah. And
okay.
Also, depending on which side your disc herniated, if it went more left or right, which side your symptoms are worse on.
Good point.
If the disc is to the left and the MRI shows that, and you're going in there saying my right thumb hurts, then it's not related.
Right.
And so no neurosurgeon is going to see you twice and say, let's go do surgery.
Right. And then by the time you get to the neurosurgeon's office, they're going to do the same thing that all the other doctors have done. All right, let me see the film. Many times the neurosurgeon wants a different MRI because they're thinking about cutting on you, right? In a very serious procedure.
Yep. That
has a lot of risks. So if they don't have a perfect MRI film, they're going to want another one. They want details. I don't blame them. And tell me what this particular patient ended up getting
So she was a candidate for an anterior cervical discectomy infusion.
All right, slow down.
Yeah.
And let's talk about what all that means.
Okay, so we call it ACDF. Anterior, which means that they operated through the front of your neck. And we've got some images. Cervical is the cervical spine. Discectomy, they're going to remove that herniated disc. And then fusion. And we're going to fuse that part of the spine, C6 and 7, together to hold it in place, since there's not a disc in there anymore, the natural padding you're born with. So we're going to put a spacer in there and then fuse that. So you're going to have C6 and 7 as one common joint now, which works. It sounds like, oh wow, how can you take a joint and fuse it together? That's because when you bend your neck and twist your neck, the cervical spine itself is not bending like this. Most of your bend happens at the base of your skull and then lower down. That's more just like this, and you can do that when it's fused, okay? So we have some images to kind of depict how this goes through. So anterior.
By the way, these are graphic images. If you are squeamish at all, we're getting ready to show you something that's probably going to make you jump out of your
an anterior approach where they will then remove your disc, which is this blue gelatin material.
Again, this is the front of your neck they're having to operate on. Keep in mind, this lady was in a wreck and she got a clean diagnosis from the I say clean. She got a cervical strain whiplash diagnosis from the ER, and here she is now a year later. Look at this procedure she had to go through. They slit her throat, I guess, up from top to bottom here. Okay.
Yeah,
I know you're glazing over that like it's no big deal, but it's a big deal to everybody else.
You're under general anesthesia, you're intubated.
Right.
The only part of your body that's exposed is your neck. Everything else is covered in blue drapes, it's all sterile, and there's usually a neurosurgeon or a neurosurgeon and an assistant working in this small area of your body.
Look, I think they're saints, but I'm just telling you, it's a serious procedure. Requires a lot of, you got to really be hurting to do this, in my opinion. Okay, so how do they get all your veins and trachea and all that out of the way?
So there's a lot of things in the way here. Your thyroid gland, your carotid and your jugular vessels, and also recurrent laryngeal nerve, which is how you talk. That's your vocal cords. So these neurosurgeons, even though they're neurosurgeons, they have to go through a lot of other stuff that other surgeons usually deal with to get where they want to be. So they're skilled at dissecting through this area safely and identifying the vessels and the nerves that they want to protect to space this out. And we call them retractors because that's what they do. It retracts the tissue. And there's
the vessels.
There's specialized retractors for this procedure itself and for depending on where they're working in your anatomy. So some people have a big huge neck with a lot of tissue around it, they can still get in there. Some people have skinny little necks and you can see every little anatomic part of their neck just from across the room. They can still do a procedure there. So once they get in there, they'll work this gelatin, this disc material out. Okay, so they're coming out anterior. Right?
Come towards your face.
Yeah, towards your face, okay? They're pulling everything out. They're not going through your spinal cord, which is behind all
It's like they're sucking it.
Yeah, they're pulling it out, and they're relieving that pressure off of the spinal cord. So they're coming out this way. These bulge discs are going backwards. They're pulling it forward, pulling it out. And they're going to relieve the pressure on the spinal cord where these indentations were, these bulges.
All right. So that's a serious surgery. What's the recovery like for that kind of surgery?
Well, so we're not done.
Oh, sorry.
So then after they pulled that out, they put spacers in it.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So this is like
A 2
5,
level.
6, and 7, right? So they put spacers in there and then they put a plate on the front of that area where they work so that when you're done, you look like this. And you started like this.
This is the front?
Yep. So there's a plate on the front now. Okay? So the client then ends up with an x-ray that looks like this. This is a normal x-ray. This is not an MRI or a CAT scan. This was done, cheap, quick, fast x-ray done.
To see where the hardware is.
Yep, just to see where the hardware is, to
You
see
see
what's
the
lined up.
spacers in there.
Yep, the spacers are in there. The hardware, the screw goes into the cervical, the vertebral body to hold it in place. And so these bulge discs that they took out of here are no longer pushing backwards on the spinal cord, which is what was causing our client's problems. All of her extremities.
Again, let me remind you, I know I keep saying this person got this discharge instruction, whiplash cervical strain, and she needed this kind of procedure. Generally, how much are these procedures?
How much do they cost?
Yes, with all the attendant costs.
It'll be over $100,000 just for the procedure.
Right.
And this young lady's total medicals were
200,000.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and it lasted, this particular case lasted over from the end of 19 to the beginning of 21. So if that gives you an idea of how long these cases can last if they end up needing surgery like this, obviously it's well into the 6 figures in value. If there's enough insurance, the case is well worth a lot more than the medical expenses. And she left the ER with a whiplash cervical strain diagnosis. So the important thing to understand here, if you don't take anything else away from this whole 3-part series, when you leave the ER, you're not getting a diagnosis from your car wreck. You're getting a diagnosis from the ER about whether or not you're going to die or lose a limb in 24 or 48 hours. That's the only relevance of what you're doing there. Everything else is going to come after that. That's why it's important to take your time. You don't want to settle with the insurance company at that point. You want to, I will say this too. I think I left this out. But the insurance company offered this lady $2,500 before they came to me. $2,500 to settle her case that was ultimately worth $600,000. So they were trying to get it done for $2,500. And if you have a discharge instruction that says whiplash or cervical strain, and the doctor in the ER said you didn't need to be admitted, you may think, well, heck, I'll take $2,500. Meanwhile, you're leaving around $597,500 on the table. So, and you have a serious injury that will cause a lifetime of symptoms unless you get the surgery. So, this was our 3-part series. I know it took, if you watched the whole thing, it took longer than we had anticipated, but it was important for us to go through all that stuff. We're going to do another series on head injuries, traumatic brain injuries. We're going to take another hypothetical but real client and walk through the stages of that treatment, which is a lot more complex because you're dealing with something that doesn't necessarily show up on any diagnostic study.
And not a surgery.
Correct. So long and short of it is, if you have a car wreck and you have questions about the injuries associated with the car wreck and you want more information, you can find us on the web at zarzarlaw.com or you can call us at 855-HIRE-JOE. Thank you very much.